I don't wanna be the boy that runs in the back. I don't wanna be the kid that falls in the dark. All I really want to be is the guy that gets that girl.
Welcome to the AJ Steele Show. We discuss politics, sex, money, and everything in between. And now, here's your host, an immigrant, a self-made millionaire, an American, AJ Steele.
Everything I say and do, I'm just not good enough for you. I don't wanna be the boy that runs.
Welcome to another exciting episode of the AJ Steele Show. I'm so glad to be back with you, and I hope that you know how much I appreciate your continued listenership and your social media friendship. We keep getting thousands of new listeners every month, despite the fact that we don't belong to any network or mainstream media conglomerate. And just last week, we hit top 40 in Canada and England. And believe it or not, we hit number 5 in Uganda. Yes, Uganda, Africa. Not to mention the fact that our podcast consistently ranks in the top 40 here in the USA. People ask me why this is happening, and I really don't have an answer. Maybe it's just the fact that I'm not beholden to anyone, and that I can tell you exactly what I think, with zero oversight by any fat cats. Look, I don't ask my listeners for money because I don't need it. I have my own, and I plan to keep it that way. The only thing I really ask for is for your friendship and that you subscribe and listen to our show, and this won't cost you anything because the show is free. On my end, I promise to continue telling you the unvarnished truth, which is the only thing I know how to do. So what are we going to talk about today? Well, today we have a fascinating interview with Ruthie Blum. She's an American-born top Israeli opinion writer whom I've been reading and admiring for many years now. You may wonder why I've decided to interview an important Israeli thinker while we have so many of our own problems here in America. Things like inflation and crime and political corruption and a string of endless new wars fueled by Joe Biden's weakness. Not to mention the social and moral disintegration and the institutional anti-white, anti-Christian, anti-nuclear family racism that we're witnessing in this nation. Well, the Jewish people, and in more recent times, the nation of Israel, have always been the canary in the coal mine. It seems that in history, whenever there's increased anti-Semitism, it always serves as a type of a forewarning or a beginning or a heralding of things spiraling out of control for the rest of humanity as well. But in some ways, Israel is much more than that. In many ways, it's a mirror to our own lives here in America. Think about it. The same people who hate Israel for some mysterious or maybe unmysterious reason happen to be the same folks who hate America. Think about the Iranians or the rich globalist Europeans, or even closer to home. Think about the newer members of the Democratic Party, AOC, Ilhan Omar, Bernie Sanders, Louis Farrakhan, Antifa, BLM, the list goes on and on. They all hate America and everything that it stands for. And in the same breath, they also hate Israel with an equally unbridled passion. But there's also the other side. What about those who are known to love and admire our nation? Donald Trump, Ron DeSantis, Christians, evangelicals, Orthodox Jews, conservatives in general. They all love and support Israel with a passion that is in every way opposite to the left's and yet is just as strong. Look, our world is once again engaged in a struggle between the children of darkness and the children of the light. It's a war that's been going on since the beginning of human history, and it's never ended. It's a battle for the soul and survival of America and Israel. And only one side will win. The battle lines are drawn and clearly marked. The only question is, which side will you be on? Which side will you be on? Ladies and gentlemen, before I take a short break, I would like to remind you to spread the word about the AJ Steele Show and to ask all of your friends and family to subscribe to us for free. And don't forget to listen. The AJ Steele Show is available on all the major podcast providers, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, and many others. I also hope that you don't forget to follow the AJ Steele Show on social media as well. It's one of the best chances I have to actually interact with all of you out there and to hear what you have to say. And a lot of the stuff I read there is very inspiring. Some of it is very anger-inducing. But in general, it's a nice community that we have on Twitter and Gab, etc. Okay, it's time for a break. When we get back, we will be joined by Ruthie Blum of the JNS and Jerusalem Post. This is AJ Steele. Don't go anywhere.
All I really want to be is the guy that gets the girl.
The AJ Steele Show. Think of your loudmouth best friend, hated by all the wives, because he tells it just like it is.
Finally see your love belongs to me.
Welcome back to the AJ Steele Show. I'd like to introduce Ruthie Blum, an American-Israeli columnist for JNS, also known as the Jewish News Syndicate and the Jerusalem Post. She's a regular commentator on life in Israel and U.S. Israel relations. She's the winner of the Louis Rappaport Award for Excellence in Commentary, and she's also the author of the book To Hell in a Handbasket, Carter, Obama, and the Arab Spring. Ruthie, welcome to the AJ Steele Show.
It's nice to be here.
Great. So before I start the interview, I just wanted to let you know that I've been reading your excellent articles for many years now. And a funny thing happened while I was preparing for our conversation. I was trying to learn a little bit more about who you were, and I was reading your online biography, and I noticed that your father's name sounded very familiar to me. So I went into my library, and after a few minutes of searching, I found a book written by him. His name is obviously Norman Podhoretz, and it's called World War IV, which I bought and read in 2008. It sounds like you have a pretty fancy pedigree, huh? The apple didn't fall far from the tree.
I suppose.
So let's get to business, because this is what this is all about. So about 18 months ago, we had a political earthquake here in the U.S. when a seemingly senile Joe Biden, whom I consider to be a puppet of Obama and his globalist bosses, somehow managed to become president. We can talk all day about the so-called election and the supposed record 81 million votes he received. But one way or another, he was installed in the White House as president. And now in Israel, you also had what I consider to be a globalist-driven tsunami, where a guy named Naftali Bennett, who got about 5% of the total Israeli vote, became prime minister. And the guy who got the most votes, by far, Benjamin Netanyahu, is sitting in the opposition. Do you see any parallels between these two very weird elections, which ended up leading to radical left-wing governments in both countries?
I see several parallels, though the electoral systems are so different that you can't really compare it. The real parallel is the love and or hatred for a particular individual. In the United States, it was Donald Trump, and in Israel, it's Bibi Netanyahu. That is very, very similar, that there is high emotions on, now both Netanyahu and Trump are incredibly popular. But those who hate them so much that they were even willing, people in their own party, people on their own political side, to break away and go against them. And there's a similarity. There are many Republicans who turned against Trump, many right-wingers in Israel who turned against Netanyahu. And that started a lot of chaos. Another thing that they both had in common was the coronavirus pandemic, which is to say, whatever your position is on Biden's election, whether it was stolen, not stolen, Trump was a shoo-in before the pandemic because the economy in the United States was booming. And let's face it, Americans, like everybody, we care about the economy because that's how because that is connected to everything we do in our daily lives. So everyone cares about the economy. So anyway, what happened was the pandemic came along and destroyed economies. As a result, whether or not you believe that the election was stolen from Trump, had he had a real landslide, they wouldn't have been able to steal it. Let's put it that way. Okay. And in Israel, now it's also interesting here. I have to, put in parentheses. What's really fascinating is how everybody judged the pandemic based on the hatred for the leader, okay? In the United States, when Trump was quite blasé about the pandemic and said, get about your business, do what you have to do, we're not shutting down anything, he was attacked for killing people, right? You're killing all these people and you're not taking this seriously. In Israel, Netanyahu had the opposite approach. Lock everything down. It was a germophobic approach right from the beginning. Stay away from your loved ones. Lock everything down. Shut down the stores. And he was accused of killing everything and killing people because it didn't have to do with people's view of the virus, but rather their view of the leader in question. And so, though they had opposite policies towards the virus in the beginning, because, after that, no country knew what to do about it, and they still don't. Because the fact is, the virus had to take its course, had to kill who it was going to kill, make people sick, whatever. It's still there, and it's mutating, which is what viruses do. The fact is, all leaders in the world got punished for this. Most leaders did, but not all leaders were running for election. So that's also an important factor. The other thing is that the electoral system in Israel enabled Naftali Bennett legally to pull the stunt that he pulled. So let's make that clear. He did not do anything illegal. The system enabled it, and the anti-Netanyahu crew from the left, the right, and the center pushed for it.
So we can talk about whether he did things legally or not. He definitely lied to the Israeli people, as far as what I know. And also, if we're going to talk about the
totally. Let me interrupt you here for 1 second. It's not just that he lied, okay? All politicians lie. All politicians make campaign promises. Even politicians I vote for, okay? They make promises they can't keep or they won't keep. Or forget about that for a second. On the eve of the election, he went on television and signed an affidavit that he would
never join Yair Lapid in a government, not sit with him, not sit over him, under him, next to him. And he said, and here, I'm signing this, and I invite you, Netanyahu, to come and sign that you will not form a coalition with Mansour Abbas, the head of the Muslim Brotherhood Party. And the next day, practically the next day, once the coalition was, he did exactly those two things himself.
So you're right. That's politicians for you. And we could talk about the source of the COVID, the coronavirus. I believe that China released it. I'm a medical person. I ran hospitals for many years here in America. So I know a little bit about infection control. And that's for another show, because last time I did a show about this, YouTube banned us. So we're not going to get too deep into that. But we can talk about, a whole globalist kind of movement that might have led to this. But let's get back to business. So in America, we have Republicans like Mitch McConnell and Liz Cheney and Dan Crenshaw, who many conservatives call rhinos, Republicans in name only, because they all talk about how conservative they are all day. But in reality, they sold their souls to the globalist world order a long time ago. In Israel, you had an ultra-conservative party called Yamina, which means the right. And their members talked a big game, just like you told us, about how religious they were and how Zionist and what kind of credentials they have and how they would never allow Arabs to destroy the nation. And then in order to fill the prime minister's position, they joined up with all the radical left politicians and all the Arab politicians who, for all practical purposes...
Well, not all the Arab politicians, not the party that refused to join any Zionist party, and that was the Joint Arab List. Right, so... Not all the Arabs.
So at least one of the parties, and for all practical purposes, that party is sworn to the destruction of Israel. How did this happen? Why did this happen?
Okay, so it happened. It's so complicated. It happened because there were 3 rounds of elections that were inconclusive. Now, Americans will look at let's say the polls or the way the votes were distributed party by party, and we'll see that the Likud party headed by Netanyahu is way above the others. Okay. The second, way above. But we don't vote that way in Israel. Look, it's like in America. There's an electoral college and there's the popular vote. And there was a reason it was established that way. Okay. And in Israel, there are parties. In Israel, we didn't vote for Netanyahu. We voted Likud. And anybody in Likud who turned against Netanyahu left and formed another party or tried to beat him within the party. But the trouble was in the Likud primaries, someone who challenged him, Gidon Sar, lost badly. Okay. Wasn't unfair. It was the Likud members didn't vote for him. Okay. So the Likud headed by Netanyahu was way above the others. But that's not how it works. It works that you need a majority coalition of 120 seats in the Knesset. You have to have at least 61 of those seats to make a government. And it kept being a tie this way and that way. And, so we'll see what happens this time. We're having another election on November 1st. And we'll see if that doesn't happen again. And I'll tell you, the media are, it would be really great if we didn't have polls and if reporters were not allowed to report on this at all. It would be interesting to see how the results turned out, because there's a concerted effort to tip the scales against a Netanyahu-led government.
Well, the media all over the world is very left-wing and very biased,
Right.
and it's no different in Israel.
You are listening to the AJ Steele Show, where no topic is off limits, no discussion too harsh, no truth more true. The AJ Steele Show, we tell it like it is.
All I really want to be is a guy that gets the girl. All I really want to be.
Let me ask you a very difficult question that I've been pondering lately. And it doesn't sound fair, but I'll ask it anyway. How can Israel continue to be a democratic nation with democratic elections when about 15% of the population, the Arab Muslims, are sworn to its destruction? Now, look, I understand equal rights. I understand integration. I understand social equality. But what happens when some folks refuse to integrate and they actually abuse the very mechanism of democracy to destroy the nation from within? Isn't it in some ways suicidal not to exclude these people from the process?
Well, yes, it is. And in fact, in fairness to Mansour Abbas, the head of the Ra'am party that is part of the government, he made public statements, not only in Hebrew and in English, but in Arabic as well, saying that Israel is here to stay. Israel is the state of the Jews. He did say it. Now, I'm saying in fairness, because up until that time, none of them had said it. All right. Alongside that, of course, he also supports polygamy and other lovely values that are not exactly in keeping with Israeli law.
I have one wife, and that's plenty for me, believe me.
Exactly. It's plenty for you. This has been a discussion, an ongoing discussion, though, since, the founding of the state. And, that's not Israel's biggest problem. In fact, listen, you could make such an argument about some of the ultra-Orthodox parties that have members who won't, for example, they won't participate in certain rituals of the Knesset because it's secular. There are certain members who are not also big on Zionism. So, but that really isn't Israel's problem. Israel's problem, because in fact, Israeli society is actually very strong and actually very conservative. You're talking about politicians, okay? Society in Israel, and I think that's true of America as well. If you watch American TV, you would think that every single household in America was pro transgenderism for school-age children. You would think that every American is concerned about global warming. You would think you would think many things, and you'd be wrong. The trouble is that culture is very, very powerful in Israel and in America and everywhere. Now, some countries have a culture and politics that are, I would say, on the same page. And those are mostly in Europe, those countries. Israel and America are not really like that. Now, it's hard to fight culture because we all watch TV, we go to the movies, we go to plays, or we read books. Of course, we absorb the culture, even when we don't pay that much attention. Most people don't pay that much attention. And even those of us who are ideologically strong, we also, we absorb it, and our children absorb it in schools, etc. The good news is I went to a very commie school in New York, and and look where I am. It didn't affect me. And it wasn't because my parents were on the right. They actually were on the left until they became what you call, they were the first neoconservatives. They, Reagan Democrats. And then it took a while for them to become actual Republicans. But I never was a Democrat. And I went to a school that was a very progressive. What I'm saying is that it's not all finished just because the culture is always going to be more progressive unless you live in Iran. Okay. Now, we don't want to live in Iran. And, the question is, would I prefer to be in a full burqa or have a transgender child? I mean, those are not life's options, okay? But if I had to choose, I would choose the latter because I am very big on freedom, and I don't like anybody butting into my life. And unfortunately, Israel still has too much of an interventionist government.
Well, I'm also for freedom, but I also believe, and I'm not going to get too deep into this because it's a different kind of conversation. And we actually did a great interview with Dr. Sheldon Roth, who's a Harvard professor, about transgenderism and this and that. I don't have a problem with individuals living their lives in their own house, in their own bedroom. But I do think that this whole gay movement and transgender movement has become a part of the culture that is used to destroy normal families and normal values.
Although there again, there's an irony, okay? Because the gay rights movement in Israel, when it became very, very strong, and there are the best, hottest gay pride parades in Israel, and they're very famous for being wonderful, and all the gays come over from Europe and America to participate in them. But I will say that every gay couple in Israel, all they want to do is have children, get married and have children, which is an irony. I don't know. I won't speak about gay culture in the United States, but I can tell you that I remember telling this to my mother, and she was very amused by that fact, that it actually, in Israel, whatever happens, everybody just wants to get married and have a lot of kids. Then they get divorced. There's a lot of divorce, too, and everything. But still, it's a very child-focused culture. And so, again, while you're looking at the black hole, you can also see the humor. You can see that it's not all finished. It's not exactly like that, So
I live in San Francisco, so I know a lot about gay rights and parades. And again, I don't have any issues with individuals living their lives, but I don't think it should become a political movement for sure. And I don't think that
I don't think sex should be political.
And I don't think it should be normalized either. I think that kind of behavior is not normal.
The point is, whatever your position on is, why is sex politics? Why is it? Look what has become of everything.
Because
sex is politics. Health is politics. Science is politics. So, it's like, why should anybody's private life become, why is that? As far as I'm concerned, I feel that way about heterosexuals too.
Of course, I don't parade around naked either. Not that people would want to see me naked, but I don't parade around. I think sex is between two consenting adults, but it should not become a part of society. But we're kind of going in weird directions.
Right, we are. Okay, so let's get back to your original intent in having me on your podcast.
Well, I'm having fun no matter what, because you're a very charming lady.
Oh, well, thank you very much.
So getting back to politics in Israel, so you just had a hybrid government that lasted for 1 year. And now, like you said, you're going to another election. But in the meantime, you have a caretaker prime minister named Yair Lapid, who belongs to the hard left as far as I'm concerned. And it boggles my mind. You told me that Israel is a center-right nation, but it's being run by a far-left guy that not nobody, but a smaller percentage voted for.
First of all, the trouble with Lapid, there are a few problems with Lapid. One of them being that he's not perceived as, or does not, and he doesn't present himself as far left. Okay. The far left parties are very, they're proud of it, and Israelis know who they are. Lapid is kind of he's kind of a nobody, not here nor there. I mean, he's certainly not on the right. No, don't get me wrong.
He's a chameleon, is what you're saying.
But he, and if you read anything about these parties, they'll be called center left or center, right? Actually, the center in Israel is Likud. Okay, that's the actual center. But the left tries to change the definition. Okay.
Of course.
Like in America, you don't know what the definition of a woman is. In Israel, we don't know what the definition of left wing is. Yair Lapid is on the left. Okay. Now, this is not to say, and we got to be careful about, you don't want to, if you go to extreme definitions, you're going to discredit the rest of your argument. Yair Lapid is not an Israel hater. The way I will say about Biden was not on the far left. He was he used to be an old school Democrat. Of course he's on the left because that's what the Democratic Party is. The Democratic Party is left wing. He is on the left. But you're better off describing how they pander to the far left, how it makes no difference anymore whether they're in the center. That's more accurate. Okay, so Yair Lapid is not some kind of anti-Zionist, he's not in the Communist Party, and he's not even in Meretz, and he doesn't. But he is definitely on the left, and the way he's on the left is there are a few ways. One being he still harbors the fantasy of land for peace, of deals with, as though the Palestinians, as though there's, something hasn't been tried yet. Mm-hmm. Right. Okay. Somehow or other. And even if he said, well, not now and not this and not that, he's one of those. That's number one. Number two, he thinks that the ultra-Orthodox are going to be, the destruction of Israel and all that. That's another way. And the more importantly, he is just like a cultural icon. You know what? No wonder he and French President Emmanuel Macron were hugging each other. So there was a bromance going on there. That's what he wants to be. He wants to be like a European leader like Macron. I'm cool. I'm good looking. So that is, he's a lightweight. Aside from everything else, he's a lightweight.
Well,
he's not even a tough ideologue. He's a lightweight.
Well, my mom, God rest her soul, used to tell me, don't judge people by their words, judge them by their actions. And I do believe that he is a lefty. I also I don't see the big attraction. Everybody says he's so good looking, but that's okay.
Well, because I'll tell you why. Because many years ago, he had a television program. He was drop dead gorgeous. He was.
Okay.
He was. He had a program. He was sort of like the Oprah Winfrey of Israel in a way. He had these interviews one-on-one. He's married to this beautiful woman. And, they were like the beautiful people. And so, you can say, they used to also say about Bibi Netanyahu that he was gorgeous, drop dead gorgeous.
Really?
People age. Yeah. People age. And everything. No, the point is that Lapid is a lightweight and he fancies himself to be a European.
Well, he is a lightweight, I can tell, especially with what's happening with Putin right now and all the statements that he made that he should have basically kept his mouth shut as far as I'm concerned. It's very sad. It seems like here in the U.S., we also have leaders who have a complete disconnect from reality. They live in a fantasy world that doesn't exist anymore. Completely devoid of rationality and logic and realpolitik. Many of them are so old and they just cling to power despite the fact that they don't know what's going on anymore. And the new breed of politicians are like the Kardashians, empty-minded reality stars. And this doesn't bode well for our future, and nor does it for yours. Ruthie, with your permission, I'm going to take a short break, and we will be right back on the AJ Steele Show.
AJ Steele. Not right, not left, just right.
Ruthie, welcome back to the AJ Steele Show. I wanted to talk a little bit about our president here in America. It seems that you and I agree about him. Biden, you're right, is an old school Democrat, but not really. You know, again, judge people by their actions, not by their words. So last month, our senile president, Joe Biden, visited Israel, and just from some photos that I've seen, he was treated like the second coming by Lapid. Did Biden earn any of this?
Wait a second. Lapid first treated Antony Blinken like the second coming. That was in the Negev summit. That was an amazing event geared towards getting the signatories of the Abraham Accords together in the state of Israel to strengthen the bond, which mainly was to combat Iran together, but also to enjoy the benefits of one another's, the benefits that peace between them would bring, economically, technologically, and all that. And Blinken crashes the party, basically. Blinken, you know, of course, he's from America, and America is a signature, you know, brokered, of course, under Trump, brokered the Abraham.
Of course, it was Trump's deal, correct.
Right. Blinken arrives and immediately introduces the Palestinian issue, the one issue that was not part of it. The Palestinians were always welcome to join, but of course they were so against it because they wanted this conflict to remain in everyone's eyes the real problem of peace in the Middle East, which it never was and it still isn't. So now, excuse me, I have to turn this off because otherwise, good.
Well, you're a famous woman and everybody wants to talk to you, huh?
It could be one of my 4 kids or, you know.
I understand.
I'm very famous among my children.
So am I. I have 4 kids myself, too. So not to harp on this, but just from the photos, your prime minister looked like a lapdog in every photo that I saw, jumping for joy, hugging Biden. My God, nobody loves Biden like that here. Now, to me, I know that most Israelis really loved President Trump. How do they feel about Biden and today's Democratic Party?
Well, again, most of the Israeli public is on the right. And most of the Israeli public knows that Biden is a Democrat, the head of a party that has become more and more radical. And the point about Biden is not that he's still an old school Democrat. He's not. As you said, he's senile. Look, the guy is not all there, and he's not running the show in the first place.
Of course.
And Israelis who are against Netanyahu try to give Biden the benefit of the doubt. All right. So and that's tactical. It's like, well, look, Biden said that he signed a cooperation agreement with Israel, that Israel is a strong ally. He was interviewed by Channel 12 on the eve of his departure for Israel and Saudi Arabia. And he said that the left-wing members of his party, the anti-Semitic left-wing members of his party, are wrong. Okay, he said that. But then, of course, he came and he did just the opposite. He removed the Israeli flag from the limousine when he went to a hospital that treats only Arabs, and he refused to let any Israeli journalist go with him, any Jewish journalist go with him. And he said to the Palestinian Authority, I, as someone with an Irish background, I identify with you because of a people like the British trying to deny us our identity. It was shocking and appalling that he would say such a thing.
Yeah, but that's today's left, and the Democratic Party is being run by these people. Now, everything you're telling me is kind of interesting. I'll tell you why, because it's interesting in light of the fact that most American Jews, let me paraphrase this, most cultural Jews who live in America happen to be insanely progressive. And they hated Donald Trump with a passion, and most of them voted for Joe Biden. How do you account for this huge divide between Israeli Jews and American Jews?
First of all, let me just say, you mentioned my father and his book. He also wrote a book called Why Are Jews Liberal? He said it's their religion. The Jewish religion is liberalism, okay, and progressivism. This is not new. This is not new since the days of the Bible. And you say, how is it possible? In Israel, the only reason it's possible, first of all, in Israel too, this culture is very progressive. But how is it possible that most people have moved to the conservative, to the right, moved rightward? And the reason is because Israelis have to run every few months into bomb shelters, because Israelis gave land and signed the Oslo Accords and did this and did that, and all we got for it was more war. Okay, now American Jews never have to face such things. They don't. American Jews, let me tell you, they are facing the problems of their progressivism on the streets of San Francisco and New York and LA by being mugged, pushed into the subway tracks. The ones you're talking about are not visibly Jewish, so they're not necessarily being the, let's say, the victims of anti-Semitic attacks the way you would be if you're wearing a kippah or a Star of David or you have side locks. Those are openly, people are bashing them in the streets. But progressive Jews whose religion is also gun control and global warming and all, and knee-jerk about every issue. And they always have been. And don't forget, many Jews said to Moses, let's go back to Egypt. Okay, so to talk about this like it's some new phenomenon and oh my God, and how did Jews vote for the Democratic Party? Jews always vote for the Democratic Party. Jews who don't they've given a name. Like my parents, this was the people who became what they called Reagan Democrats. This was like, oh my God, Jews voted for Reagan.
Interesting.
Okay. Voting for Democrats, that's Jews, and they always will. And I'll tell you, there was a joke in Israel that when Obama was running the second time, it said, if Obama tomorrow nuked Tel Aviv, the Jewish vote in America for him would go down to 75%.
Well, you know your history, and it's absolutely true. If you study Josephus Flavius, you know that Rome took over Jerusalem because the Jews couldn't get along with one another either. There's another interesting conundrum or fact about all this is that many conservative Christians and evangelical folks here in America, and I have a lot of them listening right now, they absolutely love Israel and Benjamin Netanyahu in many ways more than all these liberal Jews that we talked about do.
Not in many ways. Totally. Not only in many ways. And this is also not new. And I'll tell you, I have friends who are evangelical Christians or Christians who are Zionists. And years ago, I asked many times when the left in Israel was really attacking evangelical Christians and lying about them, by the way. Lying about them. The left in Israel likes to say, watch out for those Christians. They want to convert you. And at the end of days, they're talking about this, they're talking about that. And my close Christian friend said to me, the end of days, I don't even know what's happening tomorrow. You know, you're worried about the end. They're worried about the end of days. But aside from that, I asked a serious question of a person who was involved in Christian-Jewish relations. How it is that these evangelicals stay so loyal to Israel when so many Israelis are attacking them, you know, in print and everything. And they said, because we don't support Israel in order to get love from Israelis. We support Israel because it's the right thing to do, because the Bible says that God gave the land to the Jews. We do it it was a wonderful answer. We don't do it to get thank you from some idiot Israelis. They didn't say idiot Israelis. I'm adding that. We didn't do that for some kind of gratitude. We did it because it's right. And I won't hear a word against them. And by the way, I don't even care if someone wants to try to convert me. If my Judaism is so weak that I'm easily converted, then that's my problem. And it's the problem of education or something. I don't see what's so scary about that. I honestly don't.
I totally agree, especially the liberals who believe in freedom of ideas. You know, there's a saying in the part of the world where you live that the enemy of my enemy is my friend. It's something that some of these left-wing Israelis and left-wing Jews should think about sometimes. I want to switch gears a little bit and speak about the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal. We all know that Biden and the Europeans will eventually make every concession in the book to make this thing happen, because when all is said and done, it's all about money. And to be frank, the lives of Jews have always been secondary, okay? Where does an Iran deal leave Israel?
In grave danger. First of all, it's not whether there's a deal or not a deal. I would say that the deal is a lie. It was a lie. That's why Trump withdrew from it, as he said he was going to in his campaign. He said he was going to rip it up, and he did. Okay. The deal, what's a problem is that by America begging for a deal, it keeps, it's not a good negotiating position. Even if America had a good negotiating position, the deal would be useless. You cannot deal with an evil regime. Okay, it's like negotiating with Hitler. Oh, that worked out well. Okay, you cannot negotiate. You have to become victorious over. You have to scare the crap out of the regime. It doesn't work to negotiate with them, and especially not if what you're doing is not saying, okay, here are our conditions for you to come to us and bow down to us and kowtow to us. Mm-hmm. No, instead it's here, take our money, okay, fine. Okay, you don't want cameras on Natan's nuclear site. Okay. That is a surefire way. Now, by the way, everything that the Biden administration is doing right now is showing everywhere in the world. Russia invaded Ukraine. The Chinese are threatening to invade Taiwan because Pelosi needs to get there for some ridiculous reason, which probably has more to do with her own, her husband's, I don't know, trial or something. The point is, the Biden administration is talking as though, like Biden said, if China better watch out if it invades Taiwan. But the point is that everything that the administration is doing is saying to the world, we are weak.
Yeah.
We are weak. And eventually, the other thing, all this endless negotiating, is just buying time for them to say, oh, well, look, so now they have nuclear weapons. Okay, it's not so terrible. Now, Israel cannot afford existentially to have that threat. And Netanyahu is the one who's been yelling about that for years. And the fact is, we don't want a left-wing government in Israel facing that with these clowns in Washington begging Iran to accept billions of dollars and do nothing in return.
Well, I think Neville Chamberlain and Biden are doing the same thing, and it didn't work for him with his papers, and it's not going to work for Biden. And weakness usually begets war. It's very sad to see an empire or a powerful nation like us here in America begging the Iranians.
All I really want to be is the guy that gets the girl.
The A.J. Steele Show. Think of your loudmouth best friend, hated by all the wives, because he tells it just like it is.
Finally see your love belongs to me.
Do you believe that Israel has the capability or the will to take out Iran's nuclear sites?
Well, first of all, Israel has been targeting, cyber targeting, killing scientists, doing, surgical strikes in Iran. And also the Mossad went to Tehran and stole the entire, I don't know about the entire, but thousands of documents from a warehouse in Tehran proving its nuclear activity. Partly that's why Trump then withdrew from the deal a few weeks after that.
True.
So, no, Israel has the will. Under a different government, it would have the will. Does it have the capability? That's a good question, because, again, it depends. It depends on, I'm not an expert in military operations. It depends on how deeply they're buried. It depends. What you really need is for Israel and America to have two strong governments to serve as deterrents, so that doesn't become, so that that's not the issue. Mm. So, I don't have an answer for you, except that I'm really hoping that a Likud government will take over in November here.
Well, not to attack Netanyahu too much, but as far as I'm concerned, he didn't attack the Iranians either. To me,
no, he didn't.
So
neither did George W. Bush, by the way, who was, at the time we were also hoping, listen, there are a lot of things that Netanyahu didn't do. Mm-hmm. And right now the left is having a field day over passages in Ambassador David Friedman's book and Jared Kushner's book about the behind the scenes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And they're especially highlighting Jared Kushner, saying that Trump was so angry at Netanyahu because Netanyahu didn't want to he didn't want the embassy moved and all of this stuff. Mm-hmm. Here's the thing about behind the scenes when you say Netanyahu didn't do it either. One thing you have to be able to trust your leader, that if he's not doing something or is doing something, there's good reason for it. Now, for example, when Netanyahu signed the Abraham Accords, right before that, he had sworn to the Israeli public that on July 1st, he was going to annex most of Judea and Samaria. Then he signed the Abraham Accords and didn't do it. And many people on the right were saying, you see, he lied and he didn't send. And I said, you know what? Judea and Samaria can wait. This is more important because this is the broader Middle East. Correct. The more Arab countries you have on Israel's side. Later, I actually didn't agree with the people farther to the right from me. And now we're seeing in Jared Kushner's book, if Netanyahu was getting on Trump's nerves, it's probably because he did not want to automatically agree to forfeit promises to the public, the Israeli public.
Well, it's possible that Netanyahu used that whole issue as a bargaining chip, and that's for a different time. I'm not a big fan of Jared Kushner. I think he's a putz who's out to make money. He's not a stupid man, and he's a decent guy. But, there's always politics and money behind everything. Now, to me, as an outsider, I live here. I'm safe in America. I tweeted about this before, that a lot of the turmoil and war in the Middle East is sponsored by Iran, and yet it seems like whenever Hamas in Gaza or Hezbollah in Lebanon attack Israel with their terror rockets, Israel only responds to them directly. Would it be unwise to actually attack the head of the snake in Iran instead of constantly fighting its appendages?
Yeah, but something, because I am not an expert on this subject, I wouldn't want to say, oh yeah, right, let's just go and bomb Iran. I think it's not that easy. It also has to do with where you can refuel your planes on the way there. And before Saudi Arabia, we couldn't fly over Turkey, Saudi Arabia, all of these things. Like I'm totally against any rapprochement with Turkey. But having said that, because Erdogan is an evil leader and he is no friend of the West in any sense, certain of America or Israel. However, even I can be persuaded that, something, that may be true, but you still you want airspace, you want access. So, there are things going on that I am no expert in and I wouldn't want to say. I will say, however, that yes, you need to do this all simultaneously. And you need actually, one of the reasons that even very, very smart Israelis were saying years ago that Israel shouldn't be the one to do this is because everyone will then say, oh, Israel, the Jews got American soldiers killed. And so because Iran is not just an Israeli problem,
Mhm.
It's Iran is closer to Europe.
True.
Where's Europe? Why aren't they doing it while they're drinking their wine and going on their vacations for 3 months and have no air conditioning?
True. Well, the Europeans are also all about business, at least the leaders of the European Union.
No, they're all about capitulation. They're all about capitulation. They are about leave me alone to leave me alone in my nice little life. There is no value worth fighting for.
I see it as a bigger picture. I see it as there's a bunch of globalists who control this world of all races and all religions, mind you. And as long as they're making money and they throw us a little cake and games like the Romans, gladiator fights.
Okay, but you know what? In fairness,
that's how I see it.
There's no way to avoid globalism. If you and I are talking to each other right now for free over Skype, the world has become smaller in that respect. Okay, now you cannot stop that, and you wouldn't want to. So of course, there's more globalization. The question is, how do you? I would like to see it used for the greater good. All right, not for everybody to just give up. The point is that you and I, if not for the sort of disintegration of borders in the sense of communication, we would have more difficult lives, actually.
Yes and no. So yes, by the way, we're not talking for free. There's always a price behind everything that we do.
Well, that's true.
And I think you might be confusing globalization with globalism. And I refer to them as two distinctly separate things.
No, you're right. But you're right. But globalization also, people are influenced by, it's not just that they mistake them. It's that the globalization, the attempt to, say, oh, the planet is in danger, that seeps through with all the access to global communications. And just the way before, you would have to watch your TV in your living room, and if you were lucky, tape it if you missed a show. Now everyone sees it real time. And they can see everything real time, and they can also absorb the bull real time.
And that's the problem.
The progressive baloney.
And that's the problem, because the people that control the globe at this point are progressives, and I don't think we necessarily have more freedom. Ruthie, you and I could speak all day, and we won't even begin to solve any of the problems in the Middle East. But I have a couple of final questions for you. First of all, how can the listeners of the AJ Steele Show read your writings and learn more about you?
Well, I write 3 columns a week, and they can look me up on Google me. I don't know. I write for the Jewish News Syndicate and for the Jerusalem Post. And I'm on Facebook and Twitter, and I don't know, my articles appear, and you can go into those websites or Google my name in those websites, and that's how.
You're all over the place, huh?
Well, on social media, yeah, and on Google, yes, yeah.
Very good. And finally, as an American Israeli and a wonderfully honest journalist, which is what I consider you to be, where do you see America and Israel in 10 years? Is the future bright, or do you think that we're headed for dark times?
Okay, so first of all, I want to correct you. I don't like to think of myself as a journalist. I'm an opinion columnist. I'm extremely opinionated and slanted. I don't pretend to be an objective journalist. In the past, when I've written news stories, yes, I had to and everything. I am now, no. I am I'm somebody who's on a side. And I see my side. I don't see both sides. Okay, so that's number one. Where do I see Israel and America in 10 years? Oh, my goodness. I actually don't know, all right? Because I'm, on the one hand, a huge pessimist about life in general. And on the other hand, I also think that things are never as bad as we scream about. In Israel right now, there is hysteria like you wouldn't believe if you turn on the television. You go outside, everybody's cheerful, going to the beach, going to the supermarket, everything. You would not know it, all right? And so what I'm trying to say is, especially since now nobody's in masks and all that you knew, all right? But I'm just talking about the fact that in 10 years, probably things will be better because Israel has gotten better and better over the years, even though people whine about it and complain about it. When I moved to Israel in 1977, oh my God, there was no choice of food in the supermarket. There was nothing open on, and now excuse my religious friends, but there was nothing open on Shabbat. I was stuck in the dorms over the weekend because you couldn't go anywhere. There was nowhere to go, and you couldn't go. And if you didn't get your groceries in time and they shut the stores, that's it. Okay. Wow. Now coming from New York City, I'm sorry, but like suddenly you can't buy groceries because it's Shabbat. That was difficult. Israel has opened up in every possible way. And so I don't see it getting worse. But yes, there is a danger and America goes up and down. It's a pendulum. Mm-hmm. All right. And Trump won because the left went too far. Why do you think Trump won? He didn't even believe he was going to win when he was running in the primary against all those 17 Republicans. So let's hope that the Republicans win in the midterms and then in the next election, yes.
Well, I do appreciate that you define what a journalist is. Unfortunately, I don't think there's any journalists out there that are just not opinion makers at this point. They're all opinion makers, sadly.
Yeah, at least they should admit it.
Absolutely. Listen, Ruthie, it's been a great pleasure talking to you, and I wish you continued success.
Same for me.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And I promise to personally continue to look forward to your excellent commentaries. And
thank you.
Thanks again for coming on the AJ Steele Show, and we hope to talk to you again in the not-so-far future.
Terrific. I'd love that. Thank you, AJ.
All I really want to be is a guy that gets the girl. All I really want to be. All I really want to be is a guy that gets the girl.
The AJ Steele Show, copyrighted 2022.